It was a quiet morning at the National Guard Memorial in Washington, D.C., with the sun casting a soft glow over the iconic structure. Jake Thompson, a 28-year-old soldier, stood tall at his post, embodying the tradition of duty and honor that the National Guard represented. His uniform gleamed in the sunlight, and his stance was unwavering. Tourists wandered around, snapping pictures and chatting among themselves, with many stopping to admire the solemn ceremony of the changing of the guard. It was a typical day, one that Jake had seen countless times, but what happened next would forever alter the course of the day. As the crowd moved about, everything seemed calm and routine. But then, a silver car, moving far too fast for such a crowded area, suddenly caught the attention of onlookers. It zoomed down the street, weaving between pedestrians and tourists, its shiny surface reflecting the sunlight in a way that seemed almost unnatural. At first, people dismissed it, thinking the driver might be lost or simply passing through, but as the car swerved dangerously, an uneasy feeling spread through the crowd. The car screeched to a halt before abruptly veering off the road, jumping the curb, and heading directly toward Jake. A gasp escaped the crowd as time seemed to slow. "Get out of the way," someone screamed, but Jake didn't move. His eyes remained fixed ahead, as protocol dictated. He was a symbol of unwavering discipline, unable to break his stance, even in the face of impending danger. The car, now careening toward him, closed the distance far too quickly. There was no time to react. In an instant, the car collided with Jake with such force that his body was flung into the air, his uniform torn and stained with dirt and blood. His ceremonial hat flew off, and he landed several feet away, motionless, in front of the grand backdrop of the memorial. The crowd was paralyzed with shock. For a moment, everything stopped, the bustling tourists, the noisy city around them, the world itself. Then, panic erupted. Screams filled the air as people rushed to Jake's side, frantically trying to assess whether he was still alive. The silver car came to a halt near the barricades, its engine sputtering before dying. A young man, wide-eyed and pale, stepped out, looking completely disoriented. He raised his hands in a half-hearted apology, stammering, "I didn't mean to. I didn't mean to." But his words did nothing to quell the growing anger from the crowd. The situation, which had started like any other day, had turned into a nightmare in the blink of an eye. The air was thick with panic as the crowd surrounded the scene, eyes wide with disbelief. Jake Thompson, the National Guardsman who had stood motionless just moments before, now lay crumpled on the pavement, his body a stark contrast against the polished stone of the memorial. His ceremonial uniform, once pristine, was now stained with dirt and blood. The sight was haunting, and for a moment, time itself seemed to freeze. The onlookers stood in stunned silence, some unsure if they should approach, others in a desperate attempt to help, but none of them dared disturb the stillness of the moment. The once celebratory atmosphere had shifted into one of frantic urgency. But amidst the chaos, Jake's duty was not forgotten. Despite the impact, despite the blood, despite everything that had just happened, Jake's mind was still fixed on one thing: his post. His unwavering commitment to the National Guard's values shone through even in the face of imminent danger. He wasn't just a soldier on duty, he was a living symbol of strength, discipline, and honor. While the crowd panicked and scattered, Jake's determination was the quiet thread that held everything together. The soldiers at nearby posts, adhering to the protocol, maintained their positions, though their faces betrayed concern. The young driver of the silver car, now standing frozen in the street, kept muttering, "I didn't mean to." over and over again, but the crowd was having none of it. His apology only fueled their anger as they began to surround him, questioning his actions, shouting accusations. Was it an accident? Or something worse? The questions lingered in the air, heavy and unanswered, as the medics arrived, quickly assessing Jake's condition. Jake's chest rose and fell faintly, a weak but steady sign that he was still alive. The crowd parted to make way for the paramedics, but it was clear that every second felt like an eternity. As the ambulance arrived, people whispered in hushed tones, their eyes trained on Jake. Would he survive? The tragedy that had unfolded in the blink of an eye had now transformed into something far more profound, a symbol of honor, resilience, and sacrifice. Jake wasn't just a victim of a reckless driver. He had become the embodiment of something far bigger than any one individual. As the ambulance sped away with him, the crowd stood in silence, reflecting on the profound meaning of his commitment to his duty and what it truly meant to serve with honor. The shock of the incident rippled through the city, but as the emergency teams worked tirelessly to stabilize Jake, the truth behind the crash began to surface. The scene, once filled with disbelief, now gave way to suspicion and questions. Was it truly an accident, or was something more sinister at play? The police quickly launched an investigation, but the answers didn't come easily. The young man behind the wheel, Brian Davis, kept repeating that it was a mechanical failure, his words desperate and full of panic. The brakes failed, he stammered, I couldn't stop. But as investigators began to dig deeper, they uncovered cracks in his story. Brian's past didn't help his case. He had a record of reckless driving, with several speeding tickets and even a close call with losing his license for dangerous behavior behind the wheel. That alone raised red flags. But the most damning evidence came when they inspected his car. It had recently passed a thorough inspection, and the brakes were in perfect working order. Something didn't add up. The more they looked into the case, the more it seemed that Brian wasn't telling the full truth. Witnesses who had been in the square that day began to come forward, each with their own version of events. An elderly man recalled seeing Brian's silver car speeding much faster than any car should have been going in such a crowded area. He was in a hurry, the man said, but then he swerved straight toward the barricade, like he was aiming for it. Another witness, a young woman, shared a similar account, her voice trembling as she described Brian's behavior. It was like he was trying to make a scene, she said. He wasn't trying to stop, he seemed to want to draw attention. Then came the breakthrough, surveillance footage. The cameras had captured the entire sequence of events in crystal clear detail. The video showed Brian's car approaching the square at an excessive speed, making a sharp turn just moments before impact, directing the vehicle right toward Jake. The most troubling part was the acceleration before the crash. It wasn't a sudden loss of control, it was deliberate. With all the evidence mounting against him, Brian's defense began to crumble. His claim that the crash was a result of mechanical failure seemed less and less believable. The story he had told to the crowd, and to himself, was now unraveling in front of investigators. Jake had been the victim of a reckless driver, but the truth was becoming clear: it was no accident. As the investigation into the incident progressed, the evidence against Brian Davis grew stronger, and it became clear that he was not just a careless driver, he was someone who had deliberately caused harm. The courtroom drama that followed captured the attention of the entire nation as people waited eagerly to see justice served. Brian, now sitting in the defendant's chair, appeared a far cry from the confident young man who had once sped through the crowded square. His face, pale and drawn, betrayed a man under pressure, facing the consequences of his actions. The defense attempted to paint a picture of an unfortunate accident, a momentary lapse in judgment. Brian's attorney argued passionately, insisting that it was all a tragic mistake, that his client had not intended to harm anyone. This was a tragic accident, the lawyer pleaded. Brian deeply regrets his actions, and we ask that you consider his emotional state at the time. But the prosecutor wasn't swayed by the defense's claims. With the mounting evidence, it was clear that Brian's actions were anything but accidental. The courtroom became a battleground of facts and emotions. The prosecutor presented crucial pieces of evidence, including the security camera footage. The video clearly showed Brian's car speeding toward the square, making a sharp turn directly into the barricade where Jake had stood. The car's acceleration just before the crash was undeniable. This was no accident, the prosecutor said, pointing at the footage. This was a deliberate act. He knew exactly what he was doing. Witness testimony played a pivotal role in sealing Brian's fate. Several people who had been in the square that day testified, each describing the car's reckless speed and the way Brian seemed to intentionally steer the vehicle toward Jake. One elderly man recalled hearing Brian shout something mocking just before the crash, fueling the growing belief that this was an intentional act, not a mistake. The courtroom buzzed with the weight of the testimony, and the judge had to restore order several times as the witnesses' words sent shockwaves through the room. Then came the final blow. An expert testified that the brakes on Brian's car were fully functional, confirming that there had been no mechanical failure. Everything had checked out, and Brian had full control of the car at the time of the crash. With this, the defense's case crumbled, leaving Brian with no way to escape the truth of his actions. As the judge prepared to announce the verdict, the air was thick with tension. The public had seen enough. They wanted justice, not just for Jake, but for the National Guard and the values of discipline and honor that Brian had so carelessly disregarded. The courtroom held its breath, knowing that the decision made today would resonate far beyond these walls. As the trial of Brian Davis concluded, the eyes of the nation were on the final verdict. The evidence against him was undeniable, and after days of heated arguments, testimonies, and surveillance footage, the court was finally ready to deliver justice. Brian, slumped in his chair, nervously waited as the judge took a moment to deliberate. The room was filled with anticipation, and the air seemed to hum with a tension that could be felt by everyone present. Outside the courtroom, crowds had gathered, their eyes glued to every movement, eager for the decision that would set the course of the next chapter in this tragic story. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm and resolute. "Considering the evidence presented," he said, looking directly at Brian, "and the testimonies of those who witnessed the event, I cannot accept that this was a simple accident. Your actions were deliberate, and you knowingly endangered the life of a man who serves this country with honor. For that, you will be held accountable." The words struck like a hammer, and when the judge declared Brian's sentence, 5 years in prison, the courtroom erupted into applause. It wasn't just the sentence, it was the sense of relief and closure that flooded through the crowd. They had witnessed justice being served, and they knew it was a necessary step to restore the honor that had been so carelessly threatened. While the legal battle reached its conclusion, Jake Thompson's recovery was just beginning. News of Brian's conviction quickly reached Jake, and the support from his fellow guardsmen and the public poured in. Jake's journey had taken a dramatic turn since that fateful day, and now, as he slowly regained strength, he found himself becoming a symbol of resilience, bravery, and unwavering duty. He had become more than just a victim of a reckless driver. He had become a hero in the eyes of his fellow soldiers and the nation. In the hospital, surrounded by family and colleagues, Jake's recovery was nothing short of remarkable. Every day was a struggle, but Jake was determined to return to his post, to honor the commitment he had made to serve and protect. His fellow guardsmen visited him regularly, bringing letters of support, and even members of the royal family reached out to express their admiration for his strength and dedication. As Jake healed, his story spread like wildfire, inspiring countless individuals who were touched by his resilience. His journey wasn't just about physical recovery, it was a testament to the power of duty, honor, and the unbreakable spirit of a soldier. And as the nation celebrated the conviction of Brian Davis, they also celebrated Jake's triumph over adversity. The legacy of this day would not just be about the trial and the sentence, it would be about the enduring spirit of those who protect and serve with honor. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this incredible story. What do you think about the trial's outcome and the way justice was served? How did Jake's resilience and recovery inspire you? Do you believe the incident was truly an accident, or was it a deliberate act? Drop your comments below. Let's get the conversation going. We can't wait to read your opinions and hear your take on this powerful journey.